as we go through the liturgical year that's a big word that we use in the church. We begin in Advent in preparation for Christmas. So we live all the preparation of the coming of the Messiah, then we live the birth of Jesus and everything that happened around his birth. And then we have the baptism, which says we live in the liturgical year, not the calendar year, but the liturgical year, we live the whole life of Jesus. Okay, now we have his baptism and then the beginning of his public life. Okay, and then we'll go back into what we call ordinary time. That's okay, I won't bore you with that, but that's just what, a little bit of context. So this is the baptism of the Lord. Okay, and I want to reflect with you about baptism. None of us, or very few of us, remember our baptism. And in a lot of the other Christian churches, the denominations, they say that we have to get baptized when we're older, right? So that we know what's going on. And in a certain sense, there's truth to that, but we have confirmation. The sacrament of confirmation for that. Okay? In baptism, because of what we believe as Catholics, of what happens in baptism, that's why it's so important that it happens when we're young. Because we believe that baptism isn't just a moment where you say yes to Christ, but it's a moment that is a moment of divine adoption, when we become sons and daughters of Christ, where God's life begins to dwell in us. Now this is very difficult to explain, so I'll use analogies. Analogies are never perfect, but they can help us to understand. What baptism does to us, it puts the image of Christ on our soul. Many of you come from the military and you wear uniforms. And when you wear a uniform, people can say, there's a Marine, there's a sailor. Not only that, they can tell a lot of other things about you. And that's what baptism does to us. It dresses us as Christians, as in the image of Christ. So that what we see here, when God looks from heaven and he sees Jesus being baptized, he says, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. That on all of you, when God looks at you, he says, this is my beloved Son and daughter, in whom I am well pleased. He sees, when God sees us, he sees that we are his sons and daughters through baptism. All the sacraments have to do with Jesus. Okay, baptism imprints us with the image of Christ on our soul. As Christians, it's sort of like a uniform, but it's not a uniform that you can take off. It's always there, right? And it's our job to keep that uniform always not looking jacked up, but looking always good, right? You can see Marines that, well, yeah, they got the uniform on, but, it could be worn a lot better. Right? And we all, that's as Christians and as followers of Jesus, that's our daily struggle, is to look the part, right? To look the part. So baptism prints us with the image of Christ. Confirmation is when we receive the Spirit of Christ. The Eucharist is when we receive the physical body and blood of Christ. All the sacraments are about God being close to us, God walking with us. In matrimony, they say that Jesus, I don't want to use the word invent, there's another word for it, but came up with the sacrament of marriage when he was on the cross, and he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. No, that's not true. But it's always a good joke. No, it's Christ who loves to the extreme and gives his life for his spouse. Then the priesthood is the imitation as Christ who is priest and victim. Confession is the encounter with Christ, who is doctor and judge. And the anointing of the sick is an encounter with Christ, who is medicine and a compassionate caregiver. So all the sacraments, it really has to do with Jesus who wants to walk with us in our lives. So let's go to our analogies. And that's why we have this candle here. But when we go back, in the old days, when baptisms go back way back even before Jesus, as we see, right? The Jews had baptism because it's a whole thing about conversion. But our belief in baptism goes a little deeper than that. It begins the divine life within us. So in the beginning of Christianity, they would have the baptismal font had stairs just like this, and so when people were baptized, they would walk down the steps into the water, meaning that they were dying with Christ, and then they would walk up the steps on the other side of the baptismal font, meaning that they were rising into the life of Christ. And on the other side of the baptismal font was their godparents, who waited for them with a white garment and a baptismal candle. And that's what we all received in our baptism. We received a white garment to symbolize the purity of Christ, the purity of our soul through baptism, of being cleansed from sin. And we received a candle, not a big candle like this one, but we all received a candle. And that candle was given to the godparents with the flame and said, godparents, protect the faith that your godchild has received. And then the analogy of the candle, I love using the candle. I know there's not a lot of kids here, but it works for older people too. We're all children at heart. In the candle, we see our lives. We see the wax, which I consider the body of the candle. We have a body that you can see, right? We see the body. You don't see something that's in the candle that if it didn't have it, it wouldn't be able to give off light. And that's the wick, right? We can't see it, but it's there. And if a candle didn't have wick, you could try to light it all day and it would never light. The wick is something that has the potential of giving the candle life. And that was the image I use for our soul, for our spirit. We can't see it, but it's there. And at baptism, we are given the faith. We're given the gift of faith and divine life, which is symbolized in the flame. And that's why we receive the light of Christ when we receive the candle at Easter Vigil, or also at baptism. The godparents receive the candle to receive the light of Christ and protect that light, because many winds will try to blow out that light of Christ, light which symbolizes the light of faith and which symbolizes the light of God's life within us. So that's what it symbolizes. And so the flame is there. And so our job in life is to protect that flame and to make it grow, to make it a robust and the brightest flame possible. And that's what we call our life of grace. And we do that through the sacraments. We do that through good acts. We do that through prayer, through a good relationship with God. Is this making sense? Right? And then the candle is made by bees. And in the Catholic Church, there's a rule that says all candles that we use have to be made by more than 50% beeswax. Right? And that's because it comes to something natural, but also the candle is made by a community of bees, which symbolizes the community of the faith. It's made by that. And so there's so much in the candle. And one other thing which I love about the candle is that the candle, in order to give life and in order to give light, which is what we do as Christians, it sacrifices. It gives of itself. And the more it gives of itself, the more light it gives. And the more it gives of itself, it also dies. Right? The candle, at some point, will no longer have light. And that reminds us of one of the big truths in our lives. One of the only truths that we know that we can't escape is that our life will end, right? Death. But what I love about that is that the candle gives of itself. And that is a wonderful symbol also of Jesus, who gives of himself on the cross to give life and to give light. And an invitation for all of us in our lives to give of ourselves, because it is in giving that we find life and that we find life. So that's the analogy of the candle. I already mentioned the analogy of the uniform. And one other analogy is the analogy of the tree. At baptism, we're like a little branch that's grafted onto a tree. I don't know if some of you work in the farms and you know what grafting is. You could even graft a branch onto a tree that isn't the same type of fruit, right? You could. Usually it's the same. But that's how they make new types of apples, new types of peaches. They graft a different type, right? You still get a peach, okay? Now, you can't get a peach out of an apple. You can't get a pineapple out of an apple tree, right? But we're grafted, in baptism, we're grafted into God. And his life begins to flow through us. That's what happens in baptism. That's what grace is, divine life. So we're grafted unto God, and his life begins to grow. And what we try to do in life is to give good fruits that look like God-given fruits and Christian fruits. Does that make sense? Again, any analogy is never perfect, okay? But they help us. Because if I was to try to give the theological explanation of baptism, you'd all fall asleep, and I wouldn't know what to say either, right? But with analogies, we can understand a little bit better of what happens at baptism. And so, in honor of our Lord's baptism, we're going to renew our baptismal promises and renew our faith. Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Very good. So let us stand.